As we become more confident with our idea of spatial drawing, we can then start to look at the visual world and we can begin to translate what we see of the visual world into some basic structures. I think for the moment about a cube and think about the depth of that cube. I might then also consider the relationship that that cube has to another cubic structure. Coming off of that cubic structure might then be a series of cylinders. These cylinders in turn might have further cylinders coming away from them. These cylinders in turn might have further cylinders, which might not necessarily be wholly rounded. They may be slightly structured. As we think about the center line of this object, we can think about where that center line moves and how coming off of this center line we have one structure hanging off the thorax in this direction and another structure resting on top of the thorax in this direction. How this curvular form also comes out, and again we can think about that as being a cylindrical structure, and this one also as a cylindrical structure. Over here we have another cylindrical structure, and this then returning back to the body form. Tucked inside here, although it's difficult to see, would be the ovular form of the head. We can think about the individual breakdown of the planes of each hand as we see them curving around each other. And what we've begun to understand here is the three-dimensionality of the figure. We can then start, if we wish, to begin to play a bit more with the lighting. Obviously, these series of paintings by Freud were painted largely at night, so they have an overhead light source coming from above here. So there's very little in the way of light and dark shadows. But you can see there's quite dark shadows underneath here, quite dark shadows underneath here, quite dark shadows underneath here and underneath the arm as well. So the idea of kind of looking at the object as a three-dimensional entity, if I now grab all of those things and rotate them through 360 degrees, you can begin to see more clearly the form of the figure. Sometimes when you're looking at an upside down figure, it doesn't reveal itself immediately. Again, at this point you can begin to realize this arm has a degree of confusion to it, and that's largely because the tonality of it disappears. So again, that idea of the fact that that line here would have a little bit more strength, that would come towards us, that would help us bring that structure into space. If I did the same again, placing another Lucian Freud picture into the image, again I can break it down into basic building block structures. So if I start with the premise of this plane, Now, moving away from me, this plane is slightly twisted in relationship to this plane. Coming out of here, this extends forward. Coming out of here, we have a kind of diagonal structure. This time you'll see that I've used cubic forms rather than cylindrical forms. This form is more triangular. This form from here comes out in this direction. Again, there's a depth to the structure and coming backwards through here. This again has a sense of its kind of triangularity. Over here, this arm, again one can think about it as being a box-like structure with a slight change of angle here. This plane slightly tips backwards and forwards. Over here, this arm kind of tucks underneath here. And in this head, again, a slight angle in relationship to the body. I can think of as being a kind of ovular form. And again, when thinking about the central plane of the figure, you can begin to understand how the breast in this instance is resting on top of the thorax. This breast here is hanging down away from the central line of the thorax. Through here we have the internal arch of the sternum. Sternum up here, opening arch of the thoracic cage. Then we can begin to consider the more rounded structures of the figure itself. And again, how the changes of plane would indicate changes of tone. Again, because Freud preferred this very stark lighting, the tone isn't always revealed.